Alright, this video is going to go over changing IP addresses on Windows and Linux. For this demonstration, I'll be using the class Linux VM, and I'll be using my Windows PC. On Windows, if we want to look at the current IP configuration settings, we use the command ipconfig. These interfaces I'm using today for the demonstration will not match exactly what you need to do in the lab. With our current hardware, the interface is going to be ETH3, I believe. I'm going to be demonstrating using this VMware network adapter because that's how I have things set up right now. So currently my Windows PC is 172.23.128.1. On Linux, the command ipadder will show me the IP address, and my Linux IP address is 172.23.128.100. So the first thing we want to do is just ping using those IP addresses to make sure everything's working as expected. So my Windows was 128.1, so I pinged from Linux to Windows, and that works. If you will notice, the Linux ping keeps running until you kill it. So Control-C will stop that ping. On Windows, it will ping 4 times. So 172.23, 128.100 is the IP my Linux got. All right, so I ping between both PCs using the addresses they have, which are the hack addresses you got. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to make some IP address changes using the graphical tools. So on Windows, there's a bunch of different ways you can get there that you should know from previous classes. Always right-click on the network thing and go to Open Network and Internet Settings, and then change adapter options. So again, I'm going to be working with VMware Network Adapter VMnet 8. You will be using Ethernet, most likely Ethernet 3 in the lab. So we want to edit the right-click, go to Properties, change the properties, and then we want to put a static IP address. So for this lab, you should be using the PC number for the third octet. I'm going to pretend like I'm on PC 25. So at this part, I'm going to set my Windows to 192.168.25.1. We're going to use a 24-bit subnet mask, and we are not going to set a default gateway. The default gateway is what we use when we need to send traffic off of our network. We're going to be using 2 PCs on the same network for this video, so there is no reason to set a default gateway. So that's my change for the Windows PC. A quick note, lots of times I see student not exit all the way out of this window. I just hit OK on the first window, and if I run ipconfig, you'll see that my IP did not change. So you have to like hit close to make the change actually happen. I see that a lot. So once you hit close, the IP change happens. On the Linux side, we're going to go click up here on the network, go to wired settings. When this first comes up, you click on the gear, and that will show you what the current IP address is, which is cool. We're going to go to IPv4 to make the change. We're going to change it to manual. We need to put it in the same subnet as our Windows. So 192.168.25.2, a 24-bit net mask. And again, no gateway, because the gateway is how we get off of our network and we're on the same network. So I'm going to hit apply. A couple things to notice when you hit apply. If you hit the gear again, the IP didn't change. And if you go run the ipadder command again, the IP didn't change. This is another thing we have issues with sometimes. In Linux, when you use the graphical tools to make the change doesn't actually happen until you turn it off and then turn it back on again. So you can verify the change happened by looking at the GUI tool, or you can use ipadder again to verify that change occurred. So now my Windows is 192.168.25.1, so we'll test that. That worked, and now from Windows, we will ping 192.168.25.2. So that's the Linux. So that was stuff you've most likely done something similar before. I know you guys used Mint in CNT 125, so this is a different Linux, but that is pretty similar process to change the IP addresses. Sometimes you might need to use a command line tool to change the IP address. So I'm going to go through how you can do that in Linux and Windows. On Windows, we need a command prompt that is running as administrator. So you can go to where you can run the command prompt and right click and go run as administrator. And the command we can use on Windows to make changes at the command line environment is netsh. So it has two modes, an interactive mode and a non-interactive mode. Non-interactive mode means if you knew the whole command, you could type the whole command right here and blah, 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 and just hit enter, and that would change it. Interactive mode means you can type netsh and you get in this interactive mode, and then you can do things like hit question mark to get help along the way. We're going to make interface changes. So the next little subcontext we need to change into is interface. Again, you can hit the question mark if you want. IPv4. We're going to make changes to IPv4, and then we want to set something. And what we're going to set is the address. So set address. So I just hit set address and typed enter because that's what I was doing before, typing the words and typing enter. And what it did in that case is it was like, hey, you didn't tell me what I needed to know. So the cool thing about this is down here at the bottom, it gives you some example commands. So we're going to kind of combine these two example commands to change the interface, and I need the interface name. In my case, it's going to be that VMnet interface. So in your case, in the lab, it's most likely going to be Ethernet 3. Name equals VMware network adapter VMnet 8. So that's the name of my interface. This top command does DHCP. We're going to want to do static. So I'll do static. And then I need to put the IP address that I want. And if you remember, look at the lab sheet, I said you should add 100 to whatever you used before. So I'm going to go from 25 to 125. The next thing we need is the subnet mask. And then these last two things, this is the default gateway, and this is the routing metric. We're not putting a default gateway because, again, we're not sending traffic off our network, and the routing metric doesn't make sense if you don't put a default gateway. So I hit enter. That took that command, so we'll use ipconfig to verify that. So we're now 125. If you did not run this as administrator, you're going to get an error, so you need to start the command prompt as administrator and go run it. On Linux, we can use the ipadder command to make our changes. We need to know the device name. So if we look up here, our device is called on this VM ENS160. So we can use the ipadder command. We need to delete the address first because adding it does not override it. So we'll delete the current address, dev ENS160. This should delete. Oh, need to do sudo. We're running as student, so it didn't work because I didn't use sudo. And I forgot to put the net mask. I wonder if that worked. Yeah, so it worked, but I forgot the net mask. So this is the command you should run, but it wasn't there. And then we want to add the new address. We'll add. So ipadder. Yeah. So now I have the new address, so I'll ping 192.168.125.1, which is the Windows. And then from Windows, I'll ping 192.168.125.2, which is Linux. So that was making the changes with the command line tools. A thing to note about the Linux, if we go look at our network settings in our graphical interface, if we look at what the setting is, it says it's 125.2, but if we look at what it is set to be, it says 25.2. So when you make changes at the command line using IP-adder, those changes don't update what the system thinks the IP is. So that's important to know, because part of the lab, it says for you to reboot the system, and when you reboot the system, it's going to come back up with whatever this says the IP should be. And I'm going to demonstrate that just by turning it off and turning it back on. So once I turn it off and turn it back on and look at the settings, it's 25.2, even though we just changed it, right? We changed it down here with the IP-adder command, but now it's back to 25.2. So that's how we can change the IP addresses on Linux and Windows. We can use the GUI tools all semester. I'm not going to force anybody to use NetSH for anything or IP-adder, but there have been times in my career where the GUIs were not available or not responsive, especially on Linux servers, and you need to be familiar with some command line ways to make some things happen.